The evening sky hung heavy over Ukuta, the village bathed in an unsettling crimson light. The blood moon had risen, painting the world in shades of red that seemed to make the shadows dance, twisting in unnatural patterns. The Nyandoro River, usually a gentle force of nature, rippled and roared like a beast disturbed from its sleep. The villagers whispered in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously toward the river, for tonight, all new, was no ordinary night. In the heart of Ukuta, where the palm trees swayed like the arms of the gods, Nia stood alone at the edge of the village. Her heart beat heavy in her chest, each thud louder than the last. She had always felt an unusual pull toward the river, an unspoken connection she could never explain. It was as if the river called to her, especially when the moon bled like this, its reflection rippling in the water like a forgotten memory. "Go home, Nia," a voice called behind her, soft and filled with concern. It was Bindi, her closest friend, whose eyes were wide with fear as she stepped out of the shadows. "It's not safe. Tonight the spirits walk free." Nia turned to face her friend, her expression conflicted. She knew Bindi was right, but something within her, something primal, almost aching, told her that tonight was different. She couldn't ignore it. The pull to the river was stronger than ever before, like an invisible thread tugging at her soul. She had to go. "I can't," Nia replied quietly, her voice carrying a weight that even she couldn't fully comprehend. "I need to see it for myself. The river calls me, Bindi. Tonight it calls me." Bindi's gaze softened, the concern in her eyes giving way to a quiet understanding. But she didn't argue. Instead, she pressed a hand to Nia's shoulder, her fingers trembling slightly. "If anything happens, I'll come back, I promise." Nia gave her a reassuring smile, though she didn't truly believe the words herself. There was no promise she could make to Bindi that would ease her own fear. With that, Nia turned and walked toward the river, her feet swift on the earth. She could feel the air grow colder with every step, the wind whispering strange words, as if the night itself was alive. The sounds of Uka, the chatter of the marketplace, the rhythmic pounding of drums, faded into the distance, replaced by an eerie silence that made her breath come out in quick gasps. As she neared the River of Mirrors, a dark, still part of Nyandoro where the moonlight never seemed to reach, she hesitated. The water here was different. It didn't ripple or shimmer like the rest of the river. It was quiet, unwelcoming, and almost foreboding. The moonlight, unusually bright tonight, cast an unnatural glow across the water's surface. Then she saw it. At first, it was just a glimmer, a soft gleam, like a star fallen from the heavens. But as she drew closer, the moonlight seemed to reveal it in full, a pearl. Its surface was smooth, glowing faintly with an otherworldly sheen that captivated her. It lay half-submerged, nestled among the stones on the river's edge. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. Something about it felt wrong. The whispers came then, soft at first, a murmur in the air that she couldn't quite make out. But as her fingers hovered above the pearl, the words grew clearer, pulling her in deeper. "Find me. Save us." Nia's breath hitched in her chest. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to walk away from the river and its cursed treasures. But the pearl, its beauty, its power, held her there, rooted to the spot. She reached out and picked it up, the coldness of the stone seeping into her palm. The whispers seemed to pulse through her veins. For a moment, the world around her seemed to blur. The river's roar intensified, as though the spirits themselves were watching her, waiting for her decision. But the only thing she could hear now was the pearl, its voice rising in urgency. Save us from the curse." Nia's heart raced, her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew, deep in her soul, that the pearl was tied to something ancient, something terrible, and that she was now part of it. A crack of thunder echoed through the sky, louder than anything Nia had ever heard. The wind howled around her, and she could feel the weight of the world shift as the river surged, its waters darkening as if it, too, had come alive. In that moment, she understood. The river had never been still. It had been waiting for her for this moment. The pearl pulsed in her hand, and with a shock of realization, Nia knew she was the one the spirits had been waiting for. Whispers in the shadows. The village of Ukuta, once alive with the sound of drums and laughter, now simmered in a tense, uneasy silence. The days following Nia's discovery of the cursed pearl were heavy with suspicion. It seemed as though the very air had grown thick, and the river itself, once a source of life, now seemed to exhale an eerie chill. The whispers of the villagers could be heard in every corner of Akuta, as they spoke of strange omens and misfortunes that had begun to plague the land. Benny, who had known Nia since childhood, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had pleaded with Nia to destroy the pearl, to cast it back into the river where it belonged, but Nia had resisted. The pearl, despite its dark allure, was now more than just an object. It was a symbol of something much larger, something Nia couldn't yet comprehend, but was slowly beginning to feel. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the village in golden hues, Benny walked toward Nia's small hut. The air felt too still, the shadows of the trees stretching longer than they should have. As she approached, she saw Nia sitting on the ground in front of her hut, staring at the pearl. The soft glow of its surface seemed to pull at her soul, and Benny felt a knot form in her stomach. "Nia," Benny called gently, her voice shaky. "Please, you have to listen to me. The village is in turmoil. The crops are failing. The animals are leaving. Something terrible is happening. And it's because of that pearl." Nia didn't respond at first. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of the pearl, her brow furrowed in thought. There was something comforting about its cool touch, something familiar, as if it had always belonged to her. But even as the comfort of the pearl whispered through her, a deeper unease settled in her heart. "I know, Benny," Nia murmured, her voice distant. "I can feel it too. The river, it's angry. The spirits are restless." Benny knelt beside her, her voice desperate. "Then you must destroy it. You have to, Nia. If you don't, we'll all be doomed." But Nia shook her head slowly, her eyes locked on the pearl. I can't destroy it. Not yet. There's something I need to understand. Something that's connected to me." Benny's eyes filled with tears. She grabbed Nia's arm, her fingers trembling. "What are you saying? You're talking like it's a part of you." "It's not. It's a curse, Nia. A curse that's been passed down through generations. The gods." Nia pulled away gently. "The gods, they didn't give it to me. I found it. I was meant to find it." A long silence followed as Benny looked at her friend with a mixture of confusion and fear. She wanted to believe Nia, to trust in her conviction, but deep down, something within her screamed that the pearl was already changing Nia. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble sounded from the direction of the river, so deep it seemed to shake the very earth. Nia stood up quickly, her heart pounding. She could feel it. The river was restless, and the pulse of the pearl echoed in her chest. As the village gathered in the square to discuss the mysterious disaster, Elder Kof stepped forward, his face drawn and grave. The old man, who had spent his entire life protecting the secrets of Akuta's past, knew the truth of the cursed pearl. He had been a boy when the legends first began to haunt the village. He had heard the stories from his elders, the stories of the great betrayal that had occurred centuries ago. "Nia," he called, his voice carrying over the crowd. His eyes locked on her as the villagers fell silent. "It is you, isn't it? You found it, the pearl. You unleashed what should have been left forgotten." Nia's chest tightened. The weight of the villagers' gazes felt unbearable. She had never wanted this, never wanted to bring harm to her home. But it was too late. The pearl had already begun its work. Elder Kof continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "The pearl is tied to the blood of our ancestors. It was stolen from Nyoka, the river spirit, by a healer named Zala, long ago. Zala's betrayal cursed us all. The river, once a gift, was turned against us, and now it seeks its vengeance." Nia's mind spun. Her thoughts rushed to the stories her grandmother used to tell her. Tales of betrayal, of power stolen from the gods. But she had never believed them. She had never believed that the stories could be true. "But why me?" Nia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why is it calling to me? Elder Kof closed his eyes, his face a mask of regret. Because your blood is tied to Zala's Nia. You are her descendant, the last of her line. The river has waited for you to come and claim what was stolen, to restore what was lost. But beware, child. Your fate is bound to the river's wrath. It will not be kind. The words sank into Nia like a stone dropped into a deep well. She had always known there was something different about her, something that set her apart. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her bloodline, cursed by an ancestor's greed and betrayal, now lay upon her shoulders. The next morning, the village awoke to a nightmare. The river, once a symbol of Okuta's prosperity, had begun to churn violently. The banks, usually lush with vegetation, were barren. The water was thick and blood-red, as though the river itself was bleeding. Villagers rushed to the water's edge, murmuring prayers, but the sacred river was silent, its once life-giving flow now tainted. The crops, ripened full just days ago, lay in ruins, blackened and rotting. No birds sang in the trees, and even the winds had stilled. Okuta, once a thriving village, now felt like a forgotten place. Fear settled in the bones of every villager. They knew it was the pearl, the tears of the spirits, that had awakened the curse. The journey to the river's heart. The sun had barely risen over Okuta when Nia left her hut. The village square was filled with murmurs, the low hum of fearful voices blending with the sounds of the morning. The villagers went about their routines in silence, their faces grim, their eyes avoiding her gaze. She could feel their eyes on her. Blame, fear, and distrust coiled tightly around her heart, like a vice. But Nia's mind was focused elsewhere. The pearl burned in her pocket, a constant, unsettling presence. The whispering had only grown louder, the voices now frenzied with urgency. Find the heart of the river. Free us. Each word, each plea, wrapped itself around her, drawing her deeper into a destiny she had never asked for. She had been walking for hours, her steps firm but heavy, as the village behind her seemed to dissolve into the growing wilderness. Okuta's protective embrace had already faded, leaving her alone in the wilds of the Nyandoro River's domain. The River of Mirrors, the heart of the river where Nyoka, the river spirit, lay dormant, was not far now. But with each step, Nia felt a pull in her chest, an overwhelming weight, as if the land itself was pushing back against her. The world was shifting, and she could almost hear the river's voice calling her, beckoning her closer to the heart of its power. Nia had never ventured this far before. The elders always warned the children to stay away from this part of the river. The heart of Nyandoro was sacred, a place where only the chosen could go. But now, it felt like her only choice. The village's suffering, her own inner turmoil, and the relentless pull of the pearl pushed her forward. As she neared the edge of the sacred forest, where the trees grew taller and the shadows darker, Nia paused. A sense of foreboding settled over her. The forest was alive with sounds, the call of distant birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind, but there was something else, something subtle and unnatural. The deeper she walked into the woods, the more the air grew thick with tension, as if the trees themselves were watching her. Without warning, the sky darkened, casting an ominous shadow over the path. Nia stopped, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The whispers were back, louder now, sharper, as if the spirits were warning her. You must turn back. You must not enter the heart of the river. But she couldn't. The river's pull was too strong. She had come this far, and she would not turn away now. Just as Nia took another step, she heard a rustling behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding. The figure that emerged from the shadows was not what she expected. It was Afalabi, the same treasure hunter who had arrived in Okuta only weeks before. His bright smile, the one that always seemed to charm the villagers, now looked twisted, an almost predatory gleam in his eyes. Nia, he said, his voice smooth like honey, but with an edge of malice. I thought I'd find you here. It seems we have similar interests. Nia's hand instinctively gripped the pearl, its surface pulsing against her skin. Afalabi's presence made her uneasy, but she stood tall. "What do you want?" "Afalabi." Afalabi stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dry earth. His eyes never left the pearl in her hand. "Oh, nothing much. Just the same thing that I believe you're after. Power, riches, glory, and, of course, the pearl. You can't hide it from me. I know what it is. The tears of the spirits. The most valuable treasure in the world." Nia's eyes narrowed. "You think it's just about wealth, don't you? You don't understand. This pearl is a curse, Afalabi. It's tied to the blood of my ancestors, and it's the cause of Okuta's suffering. If you're after it for riches, you'll regret it." Afalabi chuckled, the sound dark and mocking. "Ah, so you know. But the truth doesn't change the fact that power is power. And the pearl, my dear, holds more power than you can imagine." He took a step forward, his hand extending toward the pearl. "Give it to me, and I'll make sure you're rewarded. Keep it." And well, we both know how that story ends. Nia took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "You're mad if you think I'll let you have it." But Afalabi was already moving. In the blink of an eye, he lunged toward her, but Nia was faster. She darted to the side, her feet slipping on the loose earth, but she regained her balance just in time to feel his fingers graze the fabric of her tunic. With a fierce cry, Nia drew back her arm, the pearl now clutched tightly in her hand. In a swift motion, she hurled it into the river. For a brief moment, everything went still. The forest, the earth, the air. It all seemed to hold its breath. The pearl landed in the water with a soft splash, sinking into the deep, dark current. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, the river surged, its waters churning violently as though in fury. The trees around them swayed, their branches creaking in the wind. The ground beneath Nia's feet trembled as if the earth itself was breaking apart. Afalabi's true intentions revealed. Afalabi's face twisted in rage as he watched the pearl disappear into the river. His eyes burned with fury, and his voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You've made a grave mistake, Nia. You don't understand what you've just done. You've unleashed something far worse than you could ever imagine. The curse will claim you in your village, and I will be the one to take what's rightfully mine." As he turned to leave, Nia felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. But the river, the very heart of the land, had spoken, and now there was no turning back. The awakening of Nyoka. The earth shook beneath Nia's feet, the ground trembling as the river roared in fury. For a brief, maddening moment, Nia stood frozen, the sound of the rushing water in her ears, her heart thundering in her chest. The trees around her bent in the wind, their branches creaking as though they were alive. And then, all at once, the forest fell silent. The river had stilled, but the quiet was deafening. Nia's breath came in ragged gasps. She turned to see Afalabi disappearing into the trees, his form swallowed by the shadows, his threat still echoing in her mind. But she couldn't think about him now. The river's power had already begun to take hold. The curse was not gone. It had only just begun. A voice, deep and ancient, whispered through the silence. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A voice that chilled Nia's very soul. "You have awakened me, child. You have stirred the waters of the forgotten." Nia stumbled back, her heart racing, as the water began to bubble and churn before her. The river, now dark and brooding, seemed to pulse with life. The murky depths swirled with shadows, and from those shadows, something began to rise. A figure emerged from the river, tall and imposing, its form half human, half serpent. The creature's eyes gleamed with a cold, unfeeling light, and its skin shimmered with the iridescence of the river's depths. It was Nyoka, the river spirit. Her long, flowing hair seemed to blend with the currents, and her voice was like the sound of 1,000 whispers carried by the wind. Nia fell to her knees, her body trembling with both fear and awe. This was the spirit of the river, the one that had given life to Okuta, and now it seemed to be the source of its destruction. "You are the one who has called me back, Nia of Okuta," Nyoka's voice echoed, both soft and thunderous. You have cast away the pearl, thinking you could end the curse. But you know nothing of the power you have awakened. Nia's throat went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of Nyoka's presence pressed down on her like an unyielding storm. You are the last of Zala's bloodline, the one who has returned to fulfill the prophecy. You are the one who will either restore balance or plunge your people into eternal ruin. Nia's chest tightened. The prophecy. She had heard the old stories, but she never imagined that she would be the one tied to them, that her bloodline would be the key to the river's fate. And now, facing Nyoka, she could feel the weight of that destiny crashing down on her. I didn't ask for this, Nia whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want any of this. All I wanted was to save my village. Nyoka's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only understanding. The path you walk is one of pain, child. The river's curse runs through you. There is no escape from what has already been set in motion. The words hung in the air like an impending storm. Nia felt as though the ground beneath her was giving way, that the earth itself was pulling her into the depths of the river. You must journey to the heart of the river, Nyoka continued, her voice heavy with the weight of ancient knowledge. There, you will find the power to break the curse, or to seal your fate forever. But be warned, Nia of Akuta, the river does not forgive easily. Only those with the strength of heart and spirit can survive its trials. Nia stood shakily, her legs weak beneath her. The weight of Nyoka's gaze seemed to strip her bare, revealing all of her doubts, her fears, her very soul. The river, once a symbol of life, now felt like a prison, a force that was beyond her comprehension. But she couldn't turn away. The village, her people, Okuda was dying, and it was her fault. I will go, Nia said, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her chest. I will go to the heart of the river and end this